The research station at the edge of known space hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked humanity's furthest outposts.
Dr. Marcus Chen had spent 3 years aboard station Kepler 442, studying the strange gravitational anomalies that rippled through this sector like invisible waves. What he hadn't expected was to find himself at the center of an event that would fundamentally alter how the galaxy understood both humanity and the nature of reality itself. Marcus was unremarkable by most standards. Average height, graying at the temples, with the soft build of someone who spent more time with quantum equations than physical exercise. His colleagues saw him as competent but cautious, brilliant in his field but lacking the aggressive ambition that drove most deep space researchers. They couldn't have been more wrong about what lay beneath that gentle exterior.
The morning everything changed began like any other.
Marcus was calibrating the gravitational sensors when the proximity alarms began their urgent wailing. Through the observation deck's reinforced windows, space itself seemed to ripple and tear. What emerged from that cosmic wound defied every law of physics Marcus thought he understood. The vessel was massive, its hull gleaming with an organic sheen that suggested technology far beyond human comprehension. Strange symbols pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. As it settled into a holding position near the station, smaller craft began to separate from the main vessel like seed pods from some impossible tree. Commander Sarah Walsh's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with controlled fear.
All personnel to emergency stations. We have an unidentified alien vessel. Repeat, this is not a drill.
Marcus remained at his post, watching the readouts with growing fascination rather than fear.
The gravitational distortions around the alien ship weren't random.
They followed patterns, mathematical progressions that spoke to an intelligence that understood the universe in ways humanity was only beginning to glimpse. The first boarding pod attached to station Kepler 442 with a sound like singing metal. Through the hull, Marcus could hear something moving, something that didn't walk so much as flow. When the airlock finally opened, what emerged challenged every assumption about life in the universe. They called themselves the Veltar, though the sound their translator devices produced was only an approximation of their true name. They were tall, ethereal beings whose bodies seemed to shift between states of matter as they moved. Their leader, who identified itself as Prime Construct Zandari, towered over the assembled human crew with a presence that suggested vast, alien intelligence. "We have observed your species," Zandari's translated voice resonated through the station's corridors. "You spread through space like a disease, consuming resources, establishing your crude installations wherever you go. We have come to determine whether humanity poses a threat to the greater galactic community." Commander Walsh stepped forward, her military training evident in every line of her posture.
"We're peaceful explorers and researchers. We mean no harm to your people or any others."
Zandari's form shifted, and what might have been laughter rippled through the air.
"Peace? We have studied your history, human.
Your wars, your destruction of your own world's environment, your treatment of weaker species.
You speak of peace while your very presence here disrupts the cosmic harmonies we have spent millennia cultivating."
The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus found himself thinking of Earth, of the scars humanity had left on their homeworld before finally learning to live in harmony with it. The Veltar weren't wrong about humanity's past, but they didn't understand the journey that had brought them to this point. "You judge us by our failures," Marcus said quietly, stepping forward from where he'd been observing.
"But isn't growth through struggle universal? Haven't all advanced species made mistakes on their path to wisdom?"
Zandari's attention focused on him with an intensity that made Marcus's skin crawl.
"You presume to understand the universal nature of advancement? You, whose species has existed for mere moments in cosmic terms."
The alien's form began to shift more rapidly, and the air around them started to thicken with an energy that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. Several of the other Veltar moved closer, their translucent forms beginning to pulse with what could only be described as hostile intent. "We have decided," Zandari announced. "Humanity will be quarantined to your home system. Any attempt to expand beyond those boundaries will be met with absolute force. Your dreams of joining the galactic community are ended before they truly began." Commander Walsh tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. Around the observation deck, the other crew members shifted nervously. Marcus could feel the situation spiraling toward violence, could see in Zandari's posture that the alien leader expected, perhaps even wanted, the humans to respond with aggression.
It would justify everything they believed about humanity's nature.
Marcus thought of his daughter back on Earth, just starting university with dreams of becoming an xenobiologist. He thought of the colonies on Mars and Europa, where human children played in artificial gardens while their parents pushed the boundaries of what was possible. He thought of all the potential futures that hung in the balance of this moment.
"Wait," Marcus said, stepping between the Veltar and his crewmates. "Before you make this decision final, let me show you something."
Zandari's form stilled.
"You would negotiate from a position of absolute weakness? How typically human."
"Not negotiate," Marcus replied.
"Just demonstrate."
Without waiting for permission, Marcus walked to his workstation and began pulling up the gravitational sensor data from the past 3 years. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, calling up patterns and progressions that told a story the Veltar couldn't have expected. "This is our research," Marcus explained, his voice growing stronger with each word.
"For 3 years, we've been studying the gravitational anomalies in this sector. We've been trying to understand them, not exploit them. Look at the data."
The holographic display shimmered to life, showing 3-dimensional maps of spacetime distortions that rippled through the local area like frozen music. Zandari moved closer, and Marcus could see something that might have been surprise in the alien's shifting features.
"You see it, don't you?" Marcus continued. "These aren't random anomalies.
They're caused by your own technology, by the way your ships move through space."
"But here's what's interesting."
His fingers danced across the controls, overlaying new data patterns. "Our presence here, our research station, has been dampening the distortions,
making them more stable, more harmonious."
The silence that followed was profound. Even Commander Walsh had moved closer to examine the data, her military bearing forgotten in the face of scientific revelation.
"How?" Zandari's voice had lost its arrogant edge.
Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since the aliens had arrived, he felt truly confident.
"Because we've been learning from them.
Every distortion, every ripple, every change in the local spacetime metric, we've been documenting and studying. Not to copy or exploit, but to understand.
And, in understanding, we've unconsciously begun to harmonize with them." He pulled up another display, this one showing the quantum resonance patterns their research equipment had been generating. "Our sensors don't just observe quantum phenomena, they interact with them.
And, because we've been trying so hard to understand your technology's effects, we've been unconsciously mimicking its harmonic frequencies.
We've been making music with the universe, and we didn't even know it."
Zandari's form had gone completely still, a sign Marcus was beginning to recognize as deep concentration. Around the observation deck, the other Veltar had also stopped their restless shifting.
"This is impossible," Zandari finally said. "The harmonics of spacetime are not something that can be learned through crude observation. They require centuries of meditation, of becoming one with the cosmic frequencies that govern reality itself."
"Maybe for your species," Marcus replied gently.
"But humans learn differently.
We're stubborn and curious, and we never stop asking questions. We see a pattern and we have to understand it, even if it takes us years. Especially if it takes us years." He gestured to his crewmates, to the research station around them, to the data displays that painted pictures of cosmic harmony in light and mathematics.
"We're not trying to dominate or exploit.
We're trying to learn, to grow, to become something better than we were.
Isn't that what all intelligent life strives for?"
The moment stretched between them like a held breath. Marcus could feel the weight of humanity's future pressing down on his shoulders, but also something else. A strange lightness, as if some burden he'd carried his entire life was finally lifting. "You speak of growth," Zandari said slowly. "But growth requires the destruction of what came before.
How can we trust a species that might become powerful enough to threaten us?"
Marcus thought of the years he'd spent running from challenges, avoiding conflict, letting others take the lead because he was afraid of failing. He thought of all the times he'd chosen the safe path over the right one, the easy answer over the true one. He thought of the man he'd been when he first arrived at Station Kepler 442, and the person he was becoming in this moment of ultimate testing. Because, Marcus said, his voice carrying a certainty that surprised even him, the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. We're not the same species that nearly destroyed our own world. We learned from those mistakes. We grew beyond them. And we'll keep growing, keep becoming better, because that's what humans do. We face our failures and we overcome them. He stepped closer to Zandari, close enough to feel the alien energy radiating from the Veltar's shifting form. You're afraid of what we might become, but you're judging us based on what we were. Give us the chance to show you what we're becoming. Something fundamental shifted in the air around them. The harsh energy that had been radiating from the Veltar began to soften, to harmonize with the quantum frequencies generated by the research station's equipment. Marcus could feel it, a resonance that went beyond physical sensation into something that touched the very fabric of spacetime. Zandari's form began to shift again, but this time the movement seemed less alien, more musical. Your harmonic patterns, the Veltar said wonderingly.
They're not crude mimicry. They're interpretation.
You're not copying our cosmic music, you're creating your own harmony that complements it. That's what humans do, Marcus said with growing conviction. We don't just adapt to the universe, we make it our own while respecting what came before. We find ways to work with reality instead of against it. Even when we fail, even when we make mistakes, we learn from them and try again. The other Veltar had moved closer now, their forms shifting in patterns that Marcus was beginning to recognize as expressions of wonder and curiosity. Commander Walsh and the rest of the crew watched in fascination as the aliens began to move in what could only be described as a dance, their bodies creating visual harmonies that matched the quantum resonances filling the air. This changes much, Zandari said finally. We came here expecting to find another aggressive species that would need to be contained or destroyed.
Instead, we find musicians. Cosmic musicians who don't even know they're playing.
Marcus felt a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep in his chest.
We're scientists. We're explorers. We're people who looked up at the stars and decided we had to know what was out there, no matter how long it took or how hard it was. We're not perfect, but we're trying to be better. Every day, we're trying to be better. The moment that followed would be remembered by historians as the point where humanity truly joined the galactic community. But Marcus would remember it for something else entirely. He would remember the feeling of finally, completely, letting go of the fear and self-doubt that had defined so much of his life. He would remember the moment when he stopped being the man who avoided challenges and became the person who faced them head-on. Zandari raised what might have been a hand, and the air around it began to shimmer with complex mathematical patterns that spoke of technologies beyond human comprehension. We would like to learn more about your harmonic interpretations.
Perhaps there is much our species could teach each other.
I'd like that, Marcus replied. I'd like that very much.
As the Veltar began to demonstrate their own cosmic harmonies, as the research station filled with music made from the fundamental frequencies of reality itself, Marcus felt something inside him settle into place. He thought again of his daughter, of the colonies, of all the human dreams that had hung in the balance. But, mostly, he thought about the person he'd become in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The weak, fearful man who had started this day was gone, destroyed not by alien weapons but by the simple act of choosing courage over safety, truth over convenience.
What remained was someone stronger, someone ready to face whatever challenges the universe might offer.
As if responding to his thoughts, the quantum harmonies around them began to shift and change, creating new patterns of impossible beauty. Space itself seemed to sing with the music of two species learning to understand each other, to grow together, to become something greater than either could achieve alone. Marcus smiled and began to work on the mathematical frameworks that would allow human technology to properly interface with Veltar harmonic science. There was so much to learn, so much to discover, so many ways for humanity to grow and evolve and become worthy of the vast, singing universe around them. The gentle act of choosing understanding over fear, growth over stagnation, courage over safety, had indeed reshaped space itself. But, more than that, it had reshaped what it meant to be human, what it meant to reach for the stars with both hands and heart open to whatever wonders awaited there. The weeks that followed the first contact with the Veltar transformed station Kepler 442 from a remote research outpost into the most important location in human space. Ships arrived daily from Earth and the colonies, carrying diplomats, scientists, and cultural ambassadors, all eager to participate in humanity's first meaningful exchange with an advanced alien civilization. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, no longer the quiet researcher content to work in the background. The man who had faced down Zandari in that crucial moment had discovered reserves of confidence and leadership he never knew he possessed. But, with that growth came new challenges, new tests of the person he was becoming. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes arrived on the transport ship Endeavour 3 weeks after first contact, her reputation as Earth's foremost xenosociologist preceding her. She was everything Marcus was not: commanding, ambitious, politically astute, and utterly convinced that she should be leading the human side of the cultural exchange. "Dr. Chen," she said during their first meeting in the station's expanded conference room, her voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. "I'm sure you understand that this situation has grown beyond the scope of a simple research mission. We need experienced leadership to navigate the complexities of interspecies diplomacy." Marcus looked across the table at her, noting the way she'd positioned herself at what she clearly considered the head of the table, flanked by the political attaches and military advisors she'd brought from Earth. In the past, he would have immediately deferred to her expertise and stepped aside. The old Marcus would have been relieved to let someone else take responsibility for such momentous decisions. "I appreciate your expertise, Dr. Hayes," Marcus replied calmly. "But I think you might be misunderstanding the nature of our relationship with the Veltar. This isn't a traditional diplomatic situation."
Dr. Hayes's perfectly composed expression showed the first hint of irritation.
"Dr. Chen, with all due respect to your initial contact work, first contact protocols are well established. We need to approach this systematically, with proper oversight, and the Veltar aren't interested in traditional protocols," Marcus interrupted, his voice remaining gentle but carrying a firmness that surprised even him. "They experience reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. Their concept of authority, of leadership, of communication itself is based on harmonic resonance and cosmic frequency alignment. They don't recognize Dr. Hayes the xenosociologist any differently than they recognize Marcus the gravitational researcher. What they recognize is sincerity, growth, and the willingness to learn." Around the table, the various Earth officials shifted uncomfortably. They'd come expecting to take control of a situation they understood, only to discover that their earthbound assumptions about power and hierarchy had little meaning in the context of truly alien intelligence. Zandari chose that moment to flow into the conference room through the specially modified access port the Veltar had installed. The alien's presence immediately changed the atmosphere, filling the air with the subtle harmonic frequencies that had become background music to life on the station. "Marcus friend," Zandari's translator rendered the Veltar's complex harmonic greeting into human speech, though something essential was lost in translation.
"We sense new resonances among your people. Some harmonious, others."
The alien's form shifted in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated uncertainty or concern. Dr. Hayes stood immediately, launching into what Marcus recognized as her practiced first contact speech. "Honored Veltar representative, I am Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, Earth's senior xenosociological specialist. I've been sent to establish formal diplomatic protocols," and the alien's form shimmered, and the harmonics filling the air suddenly became discordant, almost painful. Marcus winced as the quantum frequencies generated by the station's equipment began to fluctuate in response to Zandari's obvious discomfort. "This one speaks of protocols and formalities," Zandari's translated voice carried overtones of confusion and disappointment.
"But where is the music? Where is the growth song we have learned to recognize in human communication?"
Marcus stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. This was another test, another opportunity to choose between the easy path and the right one. In the past, he would have deferred to Dr. Hayes' expertise, would have stepped back and let the professionals handle the situation. But the man he'd become understood something crucial: sometimes the professionals were wrong. "Zandari, my friend," Marcus said, Using the harmonic inflections he'd been learning to add resonance to his words, Dr. Hayes represents a different aspect of human nature. She embodies our desire for order, for understanding through categorization and structure. But she hasn't learned to hear the cosmic music the way we have. He moved around the table to stand beside the Veltar, feeling the subtle energy fields that surrounded Zandari's shifting form. She means well, but she's trying to fit our relationship into patterns that were designed for interactions between similar species.
She doesn't understand that you and we are creating something entirely new.
Dr. Hayes's face had gone through several interesting color changes during this exchange.
Dr. Chen, you're overstepping your authority here.
The Earth Council has specifically tasked me with. The Earth Council isn't here, Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the room.
They're not feeling the harmonic frequencies that make this place special. They're not experiencing the reality we're living in.
They sent you to solve a problem using old tools, but this isn't an old problem. He turned to address the room full of officials, diplomats, and military advisors. You came here expecting to find a situation you could control, categories you could fit our new friends into, protocols you could implement.
But the Veltar aren't interested in our bureaucracy.
They're interested in our capacity for growth, for harmony, for becoming something better than we were. Marcus felt something shifting inside him as he spoke, the same fundamental change he'd experienced during that first confrontation with Zandari. The part of him that had always backed down from conflict, that had always chosen the safe path over the difficult one, was dissolving like morning mist before the sun. I understand that my approach seems unconventional, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I understand that from Earth's perspective, I'm just a researcher who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I've spent weeks learning to communicate with minds that experience reality in ways we're only beginning to comprehend.
I've felt the harmonic frequencies that connect consciousness to the fundamental structures of spacetime itself.
I've been changed by that experience, and I won't pretend I haven't been. Dr. Hayes's composure finally cracked completely.
This is exactly why we need proper oversight. You've been compromised by your emotional attachment to these aliens. You're not thinking clearly about humanity's best interests.
The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus felt every eye in the room focused on him. This was the moment, he realized, when he would either prove himself worthy of the transformation he'd undergone, or reveal it to be nothing more than a temporary delusion. Marcus smiled, and the expression carried a peace and certainty that surprised everyone in the room, including himself.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Hayes.
I have been changed by my contact with the Veltar. But not compromised.
Improved. I've learned to hear music in the universe that I never knew existed.
I discovered that growth requires the courage to let go of who you were in order to become who you might be.
I've found that the man who destroys his weak self really can't be destroyed by others.
He gestured to Zandari, whose form had begun to shift into the complex patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep interest and approval. Our friends here judge species not by their current level of technology or their political sophistication, but by their capacity for positive change. They're not interested in negotiating with the bureaucrats who sent you, Dr. Hayes. They're interested in working with the humans who are willing to grow beyond their limitations. The harmonics filling the air began to shift again, this time toward frequencies that felt almost like applause.
Zandari moved closer to Marcus, and, when the alien spoke, his translated words carried unmistakable warmth. Marcus' friend understands the nature of true strength, Zandari said. Your species sent representatives to assert control, but control is the illusion of the weak. Growth requires the surrender of control, the willingness to become something new. This one has learned the lesson that many of our most advanced species struggle with for centuries. Dr. Hayes looked around the room, clearly searching for support from the other Earth officials. But Marcus could see in their faces that they were beginning to understand something he'd grasped weeks ago: this situation couldn't be managed using traditional approaches. The Veltar operated by principles so fundamentally different from human politics that trying to apply standard diplomatic protocols was like trying to conduct an orchestra with a wrench. What exactly are you proposing? Commander Walsh asked from her position near the back of the room.
Unlike the Earth officials, she'd been living with the daily reality of human-Veltar interaction and had seen firsthand how conventional approaches failed to achieve meaningful communication. Marcus felt the familiar flutter of nervousness in his stomach, but this time it was accompanied by something else: excitement. The old Marcus would have been terrified by the responsibility he was about to accept. The new Marcus understood that growth only happened when you moved beyond the safety of the familiar. "I'm proposing that we stop trying to manage this situation and start trying to understand it," Marcus said. "The Veltar have offered to share their harmonic technologies with us, to teach us how to work with the fundamental frequencies that govern spacetime itself. But that knowledge can't be transferred through diplomatic protocols or formal agreements. It has to be learned through experience, through the willingness to let our understanding of reality be fundamentally changed." He moved to the room's central display, calling up the gravitational sensor data that had started everything. "Look at these patterns. 3 weeks ago, they were random fluctuations that we were trying to categorize and understand. Now they're a communication medium. The Veltar are teaching our equipment to sing, and, in learning to hear that song, we're becoming something new." The display shimmered to life, showing the complex harmonic patterns that now filled the space around station Kepler 442. But these weren't the same simple resonances Marcus had first discovered. They were evolving, growing more complex each day as human and Veltar technologies learned to work together in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. "This is what real first contact looks like," Marcus continued, his voice filled with wonder at the beauty of the patterns surrounding them. "Not treaties and trade agreements and territorial negotiations. It's two species learning to make music together, learning to see reality through each other's eyes, learning to become more than either could be separately." Dr. Hayes stepped forward, her expression cycling between frustration and grudging admiration. "Even if I accepted your unorthodox approach, how do you propose to structure humanity's response? We can't just abandon all oversight and coordination. There are practical considerations: resource allocation, information sharing protocols." "We create new protocols," Marcus replied simply. "Protocols based on harmony instead of hierarchy, on growth instead of control, on trust instead of suspicion. We accept that this situation is going to change us, and we try to guide the change in positive directions rather than resisting it." Zandari's form had been shifting throughout the conversation, and Marcus was beginning to recognize the patterns as the Veltar equivalent of deep thought. When the alien finally spoke, his words carried the weight of significant decision. "Your species continues to surprise us," Zandari said. "We observed the tension between those who seek control and those who seek growth, between those who fear change and those who embrace it. This dynamic exists within individual humans as well as your larger social structures." The alien's attention focused on Marcus with an intensity that made the air around them hum with increased harmonic resonance. Marcus' friend has demonstrated the capacity to destroy the weak aspects of his nature and become stronger thereby. But can your species achieve the same transformation on a larger scale? Can humanity as a whole learn to grow beyond its limitations? The question hung in the air like a challenge and an opportunity combined. Marcus felt the weight of it, understood that his answer would influence not just the immediate situation but potentially the entire future relationship between humanity and the Veltar. Marcus thought about his daughter back on Earth, about the colonies spread across human space, about the billions of people whose lives would be touched by whatever happened here. He thought about humanity's capacity for both great wisdom and terrible folly, about their potential for growth and their tendency toward stagnation. "I don't know," Marcus said finally, his honesty surprising the Earth officials who expected diplomatic certainty. "But I think the willingness to ask that question, to really examine ourselves and commit to positive change, is itself a form of growth. We're not perfect, but we're trying to be better. And maybe that's enough to start with." Zandari's form began to shift into patterns Marcus had never seen before, complex geometries that seemed to twist through dimensions human senses couldn't quite perceive. The harmonics filling the air grew more intricate, creating musical structures that touched something deep in Marcus's consciousness. "Perhaps," the Veltar said, "the true test of a species' worthiness is not whether they have achieved perfection, but whether they maintain the courage to continue growing. Your response suggests that humanity may indeed be ready for the next phase of our interaction." Dr. Hayes stepped forward again, but this time her expression showed curiosity rather than frustration.
What would that next phase involve?
Zandari's translated words carried overtones of excitement that made the station's equipment hum with sympathetic resonances.
We would like to invite a small group of humans to visit our primary research facility.
There, you could experience our harmonic technologies directly, learn to work with reality in ways your current science considers impossible. But such an invitation cannot be extended to those who seek only to acquire new tools of control. It must be offered to those who are willing to be fundamentally changed by the experience. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could feel the magnitude of the offer, understood that the Veltar were proposing to share knowledge that could revolutionize humanity's understanding of the universe itself. But he also understood that accepting such an invitation would require a level of trust and vulnerability that most humans found terrifying.
"I'll go," Marcus said quietly, and then, more strongly, "I'll go." Dr. Hayes turned to stare at him. "Dr. Chen, you can't make that decision unilaterally. The risks are enormous. We don't know what their harmonic technologies might do to human physiology, human consciousness."
"That's exactly why it has to be someone who's willing to accept those risks," Marcus replied.
"The Veltar aren't offering us a business transaction.
They're offering us a chance to evolve, to become something more than we are. That kind of growth always involves risk."
He looked around the room at the assembled officials, seeing in their faces the mixture of fear and fascination that had defined humanity's relationship with the unknown since the species first looked up at the stars.
"I've spent my entire career studying the universe from a safe distance, trying to understand it without letting it change me.
But real understanding requires participation, requires the willingness to be transformed by what you learn."
Marcus felt that familiar sensation of fundamental change occurring somewhere deep inside him. The part of his nature that had always chosen safety over growth, familiarity over discovery, was dissolving completely now, replaced by something stronger and more resilient. "The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others," Marcus said, and, for the first time he understood the full meaning of those words. "I'm not the same person who started this conversation, and I won't be the same person who returns from the Veltar research facility.
But that's not something to fear. That's something to embrace."
Zandari's form had begun to glow with soft harmonics that filled the room with the sound of cosmic music. Marcus' friend truly understands the nature of growth. "We are pleased to extend our invitation to you and any others of your species who share your courage." As the meeting concluded and the various officials began to discuss the practical arrangements for humanity's first journey to an alien world, Marcus found himself standing by the observation windows looking out at the vast expanse of space that surrounded them. The stars looked different now than they had when he'd first arrived at Station Kepler 442. They looked like destinations rather than distant lights, like opportunities rather than obstacles. Commander Walsh joined him at the windows, her expression thoughtful.
"You know there's a good chance you won't come back from this, don't you? Not as the same person who leaves, anyway."
Marcus smiled, feeling a peace and certainty that surprised him with its completeness.
"That's the point, Sarah. Real growth always involves becoming someone new. The question isn't whether I'll be changed by the experience.
The question is whether I'll have the courage to embrace the change and become who I'm meant to be." As if in response to his words, the space around Station Kepler 442 began to shimmer with new harmonic patterns, complex musical structures that spoke of possibilities beyond human imagination. Marcus closed his eyes and let the cosmic music wash over him, feeling his consciousness expand to touch something vast and beautiful and utterly transformative. The gentle act of choosing growth over safety had indeed reshaped space itself, but, more importantly, it had reshaped the man making that choice. The universe was singing with new possibilities, and Marcus Chen was finally ready to add his voice to that cosmic chorus. The Veltar research facility existed in a region of space where normal physics had been gently persuaded to behave in extraordinary ways. As Marcus's transport vessel approached the installation, he watched through the viewport as reality itself seemed to bend and flow like liquid music made visible. Stars appeared where no stars should be, their light twisted into complex patterns that spoke directly to the observer's consciousness rather than their eyes. 3 months had passed since that pivotal meeting on Station Kepler 442, and Marcus had spent every day preparing for this journey into the unknown.
The preparation hadn't involved learning new technical skills or memorizing diplomatic protocols.
Instead, it had required something far more challenging: the continued dismantling of every assumption he'd ever held about the nature of reality itself. Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenobiologist who had volunteered to accompany him, sat in the transport's co-pilot seat with an expression of wonder and terror in equal measure. Unlike Marcus, she was young enough that fundamental change didn't frighten her. She'd grown up reading about the possibilities of first contact, dreaming of the chance to study truly alien life forms. What she hadn't anticipated was how studying the Veltar would require her to reconsider everything she thought she knew about consciousness, identity, and the nature of life itself.
The gravitational readings don't make any sense, Sarah murmured, studying the instrument displays with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle.
According to our sensors, we're simultaneously approaching the facility and already there. The quantum signatures suggest we're existing in multiple states of reality at once. Marcus smiled, feeling the familiar flutter of excitement that had replaced his old anxiety response.
That's because we are.
The Veltar don't just build installations in space, they build them in harmony with spacetime itself.
Their technology doesn't impose itself on reality, it persuades reality to accommodate it willingly. Through the viewport, the research facility gradually became visible as their transport sensors learned to interpret the new forms of existence they were encountering. The installation was beautiful beyond human comprehension, its structures flowing seamlessly between dimensions that Marcus's eyes couldn't quite perceive but his consciousness could somehow understand. It was less like a building and more like a song made solid, a mathematical proof rendered in materials that shifted between states of matter according to principles that transcended anything in human science. Zandari's familiar harmonic greeting filled the transport's cabin as their approach was detected by the facility's exotic sensor systems. But there was something different about the Veltar's communication now, layers of meaning and emotion that hadn't been present during their earlier interactions. Marcus friend and Sarah friend, you arrive at a moment of great significance. The translated words carried overtones of excitement, nervousness, and something that might have been hope. What you are about to experience will change not only your understanding of reality, but reality's understanding of itself. The docking process was unlike anything in Marcus's experience. Rather than mechanical connection points and pressure seals, the transport seemed to simply merge with the facility's structure, becoming part of something larger while retaining its individual identity. Marcus felt a moment of vertigo as his consciousness expanded to encompass the transport, the facility, and the vast network of harmonic frequencies that connected everything within the installation. Welcome to the Resonance Gardens, Zandari's form materialized beside them as they disembarked, though Marcus was beginning to understand that materialized wasn't quite the right word for how Veltar consciousness related to physical space. Here, we study the fundamental harmonics that connect all conscious life to the underlying structure of reality itself. The interior of the facility defied every assumption Marcus had ever held about architecture or engineering. Corridors flowed like rivers of crystallized music, their walls shifting between transparency and opacity according to the emotional state of those walking through them. Gardens of impossible plants grew in soils made from compressed starlight, their leaves singing in harmonies that told the story of their growth from seed to full consciousness. Consciousness?
Sarah asked, her scientific training overriding her awe.
Are you saying these plants are sentient?
Zandari's form shifted into patterns that Marcus was learning to recognize as gentle amusement. All life is conscious, Sarah friend, though consciousness expresses itself differently across species and scales of existence. These gardens contain life forms from across our region of the galaxy, each contributing its unique harmonic signature to the overall symphony of existence. As they moved deeper into the facility, Marcus began to understand that they weren't just touring an alien research installation. They were experiencing a completely different way of thinking about the relationship between consciousness, reality, and the fundamental forces that governed the universe. The Veltar hadn't just developed advanced technology, they had developed an advanced understanding of existence itself. Your species approaches consciousness as something that emerges from complex physical processes, Zandari explained as they entered a vast chamber where geometric forms of pure energy danced in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. But we understand consciousness as the fundamental substrate from which physical reality emerges. matter and energy are expressions of consciousness, not the other way around.
The implications of that statement hit Marcus like a physical blow.
If consciousness was primary, if the material universe was an expression of conscious intent rather than its accidental byproduct, then everything humanity thought they understood about science, philosophy, and their place in the universe was backwards.
But that would mean.
Marcus began, his voice trailing off as the full magnitude of the paradigm shift began to sink in. It would mean that the universe is not a vast, mostly empty space populated by occasional islands of conscious life, Zandari confirmed. It would mean that the universe is consciousness exploring itself through infinite expressions of physical form. Every star, every planet, every quantum particle is an expression of conscious intent.
Sarah's face had gone pale as she grappled with the implications. If that's true, then our entire scientific method is based on a fundamental misunderstanding.
We've been studying consciousness as if it were a side effect of physics, when physics is actually a side effect of consciousness.
Not a misunderstanding, Zandari corrected gently. A limited perspective. Your species is young, and young consciousness naturally focuses on the material expressions of reality because that is where growth begins. But, as consciousness matures, it begins to recognize its own fundamental nature. They entered another chamber, this one filled with what appeared to be stars floating freely in the air, their nuclear fires burning without any visible containment. But, as Marcus watched, he began to realize that these weren't stars at all. They were conscious entities, life forms that existed as pure energy and chose to express themselves in the form of stellar phenomena. My friends, meet some of our research partners, Zandari said with obvious affection. They are exploring the question of how consciousness can maintain individual identity while simultaneously participating in larger collective awareness. Their work has implications for understanding how galactic civilization might evolve beyond the limitations of purely physical existence. One of the energy beings pulsed with complex patterns of light and radiation, and somehow Marcus understood that it was greeting him directly. The experience was overwhelming, touching something in his consciousness that he hadn't known existed. For a moment, he felt his individual identity dissolving into something vast and interconnected, a web of awareness that included not just the beings in this chamber but consciousness extending across vast reaches of space and time. Then, his individual awareness snapped back into focus, and he found himself gasping as if he'd been underwater. Sarah was experiencing something similar, her eyes wide with wonder and terror as she struggled to process what had just happened.
"What was that?" she whispered.
"A taste of what consciousness becomes when it grows beyond the illusion of separation," Zandari replied. "Your species is beginning to approach the threshold. Your global communication networks, your space exploration, your growing awareness of environmental interconnectedness are all expressions of consciousness beginning to recognize its own unified nature." Marcus felt something fundamental shifting in his understanding, a transformation even more profound than what he'd experienced during first contact. Everything he'd thought he knew about himself, about humanity, about the nature of reality itself was dissolving and reforming into new patterns of comprehension. "This is why you wanted us to come here," Marcus said, his voice carrying a certainty that surprised him. "Not to learn your technology, but to understand consciousness itself. To prepare us for what we're becoming." "Precisely," Zandari confirmed. "Your species stands at a crucial point in its evolution. You can continue to see yourselves as separate individuals struggling for survival in a hostile universe, or you can begin to recognize your true nature as expressions of cosmic consciousness learning to work together in harmony." They spent hours in the chamber, learning to communicate directly with the energy beings, experiencing brief moments of expanded awareness that showed them glimpses of reality from perspectives they'd never imagined. Marcus found himself understanding concepts that had no words in human language, feeling emotions that belonged to entirely different forms of consciousness. During one particularly profound moment of connection, Marcus experienced what it felt like to be a gas giant in a distant solar system. His consciousness expanded to encompass weather patterns the size of entire continents, his awareness extending across millions of years of slow, patient observation of the cosmic dance around him. The experience should have been terrifying, but instead it filled him with a peace and sense of belonging that he'd never known was possible. When they finally returned to normal awareness, Marcus understood that he had been fundamentally changed again.
The person who had entered this chamber no longer existed. In his place was someone who understood that individual identity was just one expression of consciousness, valuable and important but not separate from the larger symphony of existence.
How do we integrate this back on Earth?
Sarah asked, her voice shaking with the magnitude of what they'd experienced.
How do we help humanity understand something that can't really be explained in words?
The same way we've been doing it all along, Marcus replied, feeling a certainty and confidence that came from somewhere deeper than his individual personality. By living the understanding, by demonstrating it through our actions, by helping others discover their own capacity for growth and transformation. Zandari's form had begun to glow with harmonics that filled the chamber with music more beautiful than anything Marcus had ever heard. You understand now why we were initially skeptical of your species. Most civilizations that reach the threshold you're approaching either destroy themselves through the fear of change or stagnate in their current level of development. Very few have the courage to continue growing beyond the illusion of separation.
And those that do? Marcus asked.
They become partners in the greatest adventure consciousness has ever undertaken, Zandari replied. They help guide the universe toward ever greater expressions of harmony, beauty, and understanding. They become gardeners of reality itself.
The implications were staggering.
Marcus was beginning to understand that the choice facing humanity wasn't just about joining a galactic community of advanced species. It was about participating in the conscious evolution of the universe itself, about helping reality become more beautiful, more harmonious, more aware of its own infinite potential. As their time at the research facility continued, Marcus and Sarah experienced technologies and concepts that expanded their understanding in ways they could never have imagined. They learned to manipulate matter with conscious intent, to communicate across vast distances through harmonic resonance, to perceive the fundamental patterns that connected all existence. But the most profound learning came not from the advanced technologies, but from the simple recognition of what they truly were. Not separate individuals struggling for survival, but expressions of cosmic consciousness learning to recognize and celebrate their own nature. Not accidents of evolution, but conscious participants in the universe's ongoing creation of itself. When the time came to return to human space, Marcus understood that he was bringing back more than just knowledge of alien technology. He was bringing back a new understanding of what humanity could become, a vision of the role their species could play in the cosmic symphony that surrounded them. The journey back to station Kepler 442 passed in a kind of dream state, with Marcus and Sarah processing experiences that challenged every assumption about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence itself. But, as Earth's sun appeared on their sensors, Marcus felt not nostalgia for his old life but excitement for the future that was unfolding.
How do we begin? Sarah asked as they approached the station.
Marcus smiled, feeling the presence of something vast and benevolent surrounding them, supporting them, celebrating their growth.
The same way we've been beginning all along.
By choosing growth over fear, understanding over ignorance, harmony over discord. By destroying our weak selves so we can become who we're meant to be. As station Kepler 442 grew larger on their screens, Marcus could already see the changes that were beginning to transform human space. Other ships had arrived during their absence, representatives from colonies and institutions across human civilization, all drawn by reports of humanity's first contact with advanced alien consciousness. But Marcus understood now that this was just the beginning. The gentle act of choosing courage over fear, growth over stagnation, understanding over ignorance, had indeed reshaped space itself. But, more importantly, it had reshaped what it meant to be human, what it meant to be conscious, what it meant to participate in the infinite creativity of the universe itself. The universe was singing with new possibilities, and humanity was finally learning to add their voice to that cosmic chorus. The future was going to be more beautiful than anyone had ever dared to imagine.